Okay, welcome to City Hall. Welcome everyone to Budget Committee to consider the 2019-2021 current and capital budgets. We have all members of Council here except for Councillor Williams, who will be joining us, I understand, soon. Members of the committee, there are a few agenda changes identified on the package in front of you. I'll ask the City Clerk to review the changes for today's agenda since its publication last Friday.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, members of Budget Committee, these are the changes for today's agenda. Item 4.1, there is a presentation from our Acting Chief Administrative Officer, Joe Patari, and Dave Sutton, our Treasurer, and that presentation has been distributed on your desks at the start of today's meeting. In regard to item 4.1, there are replacement pages for the section titled Engagement Details of Community Input, specifically pages 4.1-31 and 4.1-45 are being replaced as there were some comments that were inadvertently omitted from the publication. In regard to item 5.2, which is use of biodiesel blend in the city's diesel fuel contracts, there is a delegation scheduled for tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and the remarks and supporting material from the delegation, Aaron Freeman, Principal, Pivot Strategic Consulting, are on members' desks this evening. And finally, in regards to item 4.1, which is the 2019-2021 operating capital budgets, on the agenda there is additional correspondence identified as 9.4 from Chris Baynar, co-chair Citizens for Better Brampton, dated March 18th, and also item 9.5, correspondence from George Startup, resident of Brampton, dated December 10th, 2018. And I also just wish to bring to committee's attention is in past budget deliberations, because this committee does make recommendations to council for next week, specifically on March 27th at 7 p.m. And this committee will be deliberating over multiple days, today and tomorrow at least. There are some special, I will say, sort of procedures that the Budget Committee in the past has followed, and I'll put those on the screen for committee's consideration if they wish to adopt these for today's budget deliberations. The first is that the chair would entertain a motion to receive a program budget submission and presentation, any external agency and organization presentations, and public delegations after consideration of that program budget. Public delegations, because this is a multiple day meeting, are scheduled to be heard at 7 p.m. tomorrow on March 20th, unless otherwise noted or approved by the committee. All substantive motions introduced during the committee meeting, for example, to approve as presented or amend a program budget, will be voted on at time of consideration, and those carried motions will be subject to a final vote before meeting adjournment based on a standard that has been used in the past for budget deliberations. And that standard set of motions is set out on the screen in front of you. The first motion is to approve a current budget as presented or as amended, as the case may be. The second motion is to approve a capital budget for 2019, if there is one, as presented or amended, as the case may be. And then finally, because it is a 3-year budget outlook, to approve in principle the 2020 and 2021 current and capital budgets. And then finally, before adjournment, the committee will consider all the carried motions in their totality for a final vote to facilitate a complete set of recommendations for presentation to the special council meeting next Wednesday on March 27th. And also, because this is a multiple day meeting, the chair will open a 15-minute public question period at the end of each sitting day of the committee to invite any public comments on recommendations made during that specific meeting day. And those are procedural rules that have been used by this committee in the past, and they're here for committee's consideration.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other additions, changes, or deletions to the agenda?
Councillor Fortini's on the board.
Councillor Fortini.
Thank you. Through the mayor. What about any conflict of interest through the whole budget? Some people have.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be, I think, the next item, or so there'll be an opportunity for declaring conflicts.
So on the new forms, second question is, we have to fill in an item and stuff. How do we know what item is on? So number 4. On the agenda item, number, description.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think Councillor Fortini is referring to, there's a new requirement under the Municipal Act as of March 1st that members who identify a conflict of interest must do so verbally at the meeting, but also are now required to do so in writing. So you'll be identifying if a member does have a conflict, that they'll have a conflict specific to a portion of the budget, identify in as much detail as possible that portion of the budget, and then the nature of the conflict. whether it's direct or indirect or deemed, and then also put that on the form, and that form is now made publicly available. So, Councillor, I don't know the specific circumstance in your situation, but when we get to conflicts of interest,
Okay.
the chair will ask for members to declare conflicts, and that's the appropriate time to declare those.
We have a motion, do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you. All those in favor of the motion? Motion carries. Do any members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Two members? Okay, I don't have a board yet. Councillor Williams?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to declare conflict on the compensation portion of the Public Works, as I have a brother and nephew that work for the Public Works Department.
Okay.
Just the compensation portion. Thank you.
Councillor Fortini? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Fortini. The clerk will so note for the meeting minutes. Item 3, consent motion. The items listed with an asterisk on the agenda are considered to be routine and non-controversial. The consent motion is to adopt this matter on today's agenda without the need for a separate discussion item unless a member requests a separate discussion. We have no items listed for today's consent motion. Does any member wish to add an item to the consent motion? Okay, I have a motion from Councillor Bowman and Councillor Vicente to approve the consent motion. All those in favor? Motion carries. As we begin to formally consider the 2019-2021 budget, I'd like to ask Mr. Joe Perteri, Acting Chief Administrative Officer, and Mr. David Sutton, Director of Finance and Treasurer of Corporate Services, to please come forward to provide a presentation this evening about the 2019-2021 budget and recommendations. After the presentation, committee can then ask its questions and we can start to consider the 2019-2021 budget. I understand copies of your slides were distributed at the start of this meeting that will be published online for the public access and reference after the meeting. Mr. Pertari and Mr. Sutton, I want to say, first of all, on behalf of City Council, thank you for the hard work of staff on this budget. I know a lot of effort went into having a budget that reflects the aspirations and needs of the city, while also paying consideration to the cost of city services that we and the weight of that we put on residents. And so I think everyone's appreciated the hard work that has gone into this. And I would also note we've had a number of meetings, town halls in the city, tele-town halls, where we had staff that were there helping, answering questions well after normal business hours. And I think it's important that we gave all the residents in our community an opportunity to ask questions. There'll be some additional opportunities coming forward, but your efforts are certainly appreciated. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, and of course, Chair of our Budget Committee, Vice Chair, Councillor Vicente, members of Council, staff, ladies and gentlemen in attendance, as well as those watching online. My name is Joseph Pertari, and on behalf of staff of the Corporation, I am extremely pleased to kick off the proposed 2019 budget and draft 2020-2021 presentation. I'll provide some context and then hand it over to our Treasurer, Dave Sutton, to walk through some of the details and highlights of that budget. And I want to thank our Budget Chair and Mayor for the kind words, and I apologize for the duplication of some of the comments, but this draft budget is truly a culmination of the tireless efforts from our finance team and as well as our staff, examining how we actually deliver our services, our evolving community and their requirements, council term priorities, our 2040 vision, and really trying to balance these demands and trying to stretch every tax dollar we receive. We take our fiduciary seriously in looking for efficiencies, assessing continuous improvement opportunities, and managing our assets through planning our capital projects. I am confident many of you know that we are the 9th largest city in the country, 4th largest in Ontario, but given our exponential growth rate, 2nd fastest in the country, we are on the verge of jumping many spots. But that growth comes at a price. While we have mechanisms to lessen that impact, such as development charges, user fees, other sources of revenue generation, growth does not necessarily pay for growth. And as you will see in the coming slides, we took this growth into consideration on both our operating and capital budgets. The benefit to this exponential growth is what makes and means how unique Brampton is. We have an amazing competitive advantage. We need to go and sell that message to leverage our lowest average age, that how technologically savvy our population is and continues to grow, how multicultural it is, and their thirst to live in a community that they can also work in, learn, and play. We are centrally located, accessible by rail, air, and highway. We have managed our financial resources extremely well over the years, which is recognized by our AAA credit rating. But to leverage these opportunities means we need to make some key investments as well as implement some key strategies to take advantage of these opportunities. Hence, the focus of the draft budget is about taking advantage of what makes us unique to create the right opportunities to improve our economic prospects, doing our part as a city that positively contributes to the residents' quality of life, and of course ensure we continue to be a well-run city. I'm going to just spend the next couple slides delving into each of these key areas. When it comes to creating opportunities, we've heard everyone loud and clear, jobs, jobs, jobs. And we've identified a number of examples on how we're going to be able to do that. Nearly $1.9 million investment with respect to creating a marketing and foreign direct investment strategy to attract businesses from outside of Canada to invest in and be in Brampton. Our Vision 2040, it provides businesses with the visibility of the city's long-term objectives. Our Center for Innovation and Connected Learning downtown, our continued partnerships with Ryerson, Sheridan, and Algoma. We are committed to that continued and connected learning for our residents. The establishment and continued expansion of our community improvement plan. Riverwalk. This is really a flood mitigation strategy. I just want to take a moment to provide some clarity on when we talk about this project, Riverwalk. It is about creating a flood mitigation strategy that allows us to therefore unlock and unleash the potential of our downtown in terms of development, in terms of establishing connections along, in terms of trails, walkability, active transportation, and the ability to further develop our downtown. Infrastructure, prudent growth and maintenance of our transportation network to facilitate effective movement of goods and people. Specifically within our budget, what we're moving forward with, a cybersecure catalyst, a pilot incubation and innovation space, as well as the Chang School of Continuing Education, all key examples of partnerships with Ryerson, and continued partnership with Sheridan and bringing their programming into our downtown to further transform what we are and how we look. Quality of life. This is absolutely key, and recognizing the importance of us supporting our residents. We have included in this budget a new transit and maintenance and storage facility of approximately $162 million, a transit fleet increasing by 16% between 2019 and 2021. This is over almost 70 new conventional and Zoom buses, a new fire station to support Northwest Brampton, converting our Riverstone Golf Club into an updated 34,000 square foot community center, public consultation and design to revitalize our existing recreation facilities, a new cricket field at 407 and Dixie Sportsplex Park, resurfacing of over 45 kilometers of roads, nearly $2 million of investment in playground repair and replacement, active transportation infrastructure and improvements, revitalizing our Lester B. Pearson Theater, our Brampton Library on-the-go van for underserved neighborhoods, and continued support and recognition of cultural and heritage celebrations. Last, before I hand it over to Dave, we are a well-run city, and we've committed to finding innovative ways to deliver our services with sound financial management, long-term planning, and working with higher levels of government to maximize grants and fundings are fundamental to delivering value for money. We have experienced extraordinary revenue growth and restructuring efficiencies that lowered the cost to deliver our base operating budget. Simply put, we have worked really hard to do more with less. And I thank everyone who's participated in doing that. We are continuing with our 2% commitment to our infrastructure levy in order to maintain assets in good condition. Those assets that our residents have come to use and enjoy. We are also introducing a new 1% transit levy in the 2019 budget to support our unprecedented ridership growth of 14% in 2018. And again, I want to stress the importance of the growth in our transit ridership. This is unprecedented in North America to see the ridership growth we have in Brampton. This is unique and distinct. It provides us a competitive advantage, and it requires us to make those types of investments, hence the need and desire for us to introduce that transit levy. And I thank our transit team for that leadership in supporting that growth and really having a best-in-class transit team. I hope this context provides a reasonable lens that staff considered in preparing this draft budget for your consideration. With that, I will hand it over to our Treasurer, David Sutton, to walk you through the details and mechanics of that budget.
Thank you, Joe, and good evening, Mayor Brown, members of council, and members of the public who are with us today, both in the audience as well as streaming in live from home. I am pleased to be here to present the proposed 2019-2021 operating and capital budgets. As you just heard from our acting CAO, this is an extraordinary budget year. The 2019 property tax increase of 0.3% for the City of Brampton is the lowest in nearly 20 years. We have heard from council and the public through much engagement and outreach about what is important to you and have used this feedback to guide the development of this budget. The three key themes for this year's budget reflect those priorities: creating opportunities, quality of life, and being a well-run city. So how does this extraordinary budget translate to the average residential taxpayer in 2019? For a home in Brampton with an average assessment value of $508,000, the overall property tax bill will be $5,000. This represents an increase of $70 or 1.4% from the prior year. This rate of increase is the lowest in nearly 20 years. Of this increase, $17 or 0.3% is related to city services, which we are here today to discuss. The remaining $53 or 1.1% is related to regional services, which has already been approved by Regional Council. Proportionately, city services make up approximately 46% of the property tax bill, while the region and school boards make up 38% and 16% respectively. The budget is comprised of two parts. First, there is the operating budget, which calls for $713 million of total spending. This part of the budget covers ongoing expenditures such as salaries, contracted services, contributions to reserves, and debt repayments. And secondly, the capital budget of $384 million, which provides funding allocations for the acquisition, construction, and replacement of assets such as roads, buildings, and vehicles. So let's focus a bit on the 2019 operating budget and the value it presents to the citizens of Brampton. The 2019 operating budget delivers on the city's commitment of doing more with less by providing all the services our residents enjoyed last year at a reduced cost of $6.5 million. In addition, this budget includes the expansion of service into new growth areas and undertaking several new key initiatives to create opportunities and promote quality of life. We are leveraging external grant funding to the maximum benefit of taxpayers and utilizing our debt capacity on the Center for Innovation and Connected Learning, a key strategic initiative to create opportunities for our community. We are being fiscally responsible by continuing to invest in the sustainability of our assets and introducing a new dedicated transit fund to support the tremendous ridership growth being experienced throughout the city. All of this is being achieved without any elimination or reduction in services and results in a net budget increase for the city of $3.6 million, which represents a 0.3% property tax increase. I'll expand on each of these components in a minute, but first would like to show you another view of the 2019 to 2021 operating budget. The operating overview shows you in dollar terms the breakdown of the annual budgets. On a forecast basis, operating budget pressures in 2020 and 2021 continue to be a reality of a growing city. It is important to note that balancing the operating budget over the foreseeable years is contingent on receiving provincial gas tax funding. We are counting on the province to make good on their commitment. Going back to the details of the base operating and growth, as previously mentioned, we are reducing our budget by $6.5 million or 1.4%. And here are some highlights of how we got there. Strong revenue growth in new assessment, transit revenues, and courthouse revenues are complemented by the work of management and their teams across this organization over the past several years to find efficiencies, eliminate redundancy, and modernize processes. All of this is offsetting necessary increases to provide services to a growing city, such as additional transit service, the Riverstone Community Center, and the cost of inflation. This budget proposal also includes a number of new service enhancements, namely funding for the pilot incubator space in partnership with Ryerson, funding for an arm's length arts council, which staff will report back on to council, funding for additional community recognized events, initial funding for community improvement plan incentives, and finally funding for fire services to address call volumes, wellness and inclusion training and support, and a community safety advisor. Included within this budget is funding for future debt repayments related to the Center for Innovation and Connected Learning. This funding will be used to repay up to $100 million borrowed for the future construction of this new facility. As you know, this facility is intended to host a new downtown library, an innovation hub, and cybersecurity, and will be an anchor for local innovation and global competitiveness, foster creativity, collaboration, and entrepreneurial initiatives, attract diverse knowledge between academia, business, and the community, and strengthen Brampton's presence in the regional innovation corridor. Within this budget, we have also proposed the continuation of the 2% annual infrastructure levy increase, which is intended to first stabilize and then close the infrastructure gap over time. To put this amount in perspective, the city's current asset replacement value is estimated to be around $5.8 billion. After the increase proposed for 2019, the annual contribution for asset infrastructure replacement projects will be $63 million, or 1.1% of total asset replacement value. In the middle and on the right, you have a couple of numbers used to approximate the required annual amount of investment to maintain the city's assets. Annual depreciation is on the low end at $136 million, while current annual average replacement cost is $213 million. In comparison to the infrastructure contribution currently being made, this represents only 1/2 of depreciation and 1/3 of current replacement value. The gap between available infrastructure funding and replacement value is what I'd like to touch on next. Today, our infrastructure gap is estimated at around $250 million, and it is projected to grow to around $750 million in 10 years. If there is a positive to take away from this, it's that with the continuation of the annual 2% infrastructure levy, the infrastructure gap begins to stabilize within 10 years. It is our goal to further refine the needs both in terms of timing and funding in respect to capital reinvestment, as well as continue to advocate for additional infrastructure funds from other levels of government. Switching gears to another key funding need is transit growth management. We've heard from council, we've heard from the public in various engagements and outreach that transit is one of the top priorities for the city. This is also reflected in the significant ridership growth in 2017 and 2018, which has far exceeded the national average by a wide margin. Staff is therefore proposing a 1% transit levy to provide a dedicated, stable source of funding for transit service needs. This levy will be reviewed annually based on ridership trends, the timing of future service increases, as well as outcomes from future development charge studies. Furthermore, the 2019 budget assumes that Brampton will receive its share of public transit stream funding. Over the next 3 years, the city is depending on this external funding for 71% of the city's unprecedented transit capital program. This is an excellent example of how all three levels of government working together to meet the needs of our citizens. Moving on to the overall capital program for the city, the 2019 to 2021 capital budget proposes an average funding requirement of just under $400 million per year and a 3-year total of just under $1.2 billion. The 2019 proposed capital program is $384 million. Similar to the operating budget, this level of funding is counting on commitments made by other levels of government to be fulfilled. Major funding sources of the 2019 capital budget include development charges, debt financing, tax-based contributions, federal gas tax, and funding from other levels of government. Outside of the funding sources under the city's control, we are counting on commitments made by our partners in federal and provincial governments via the Public Transit Stream Fund of $46 million in grants. This funding is necessary for the city to be able to deliver transit's capital program. Also included in this capital funding is $96 million in borrowing for the Center for Innovation and Design of the Transit Maintenance and Storage Facility. When combining the contributions made by our taxpayers to maintain our infrastructure, federal gas tax, and one-time surpluses from prior years, the 2019 capital budget includes a funding allocation of $115 million for infrastructure repair and replacement. On the right, we first have some examples of current city assets. The city advises a proactive approach to maintain the quality of our assets, therefore avoiding expensive reactive solutions and disruption to service. Here are a few examples of what this infrastructure could look like in the future if proper investments are not made at the appropriate time. To conclude the capital section, the following 3 slides highlight the top 15 highest value capital projects by year. I won't go through all of these today, but I'll touch on a couple. For 2019, we have the Center for Innovation. We have the construction of Chris Gibson Rec Center. We have the construction for Balmoral Rec Center. We have a new fire station, 214 construction, and you'll see transit and road windings throughout all 3 years of these next few slides. For 2020, we have Howden Rec Center construction. We have the transit storage facility construction. We have Williams Parkway widening, and we have a fire station 201 replacement. And for 2021, we have the Embleton Rec Center construction, we have Torbram Goreway Drive widenings, and we have the Gore Meadows Phase 2 construction. Lastly, I'll end with the following 2 slides related to property tax impact. Property tax calculations are complicated, so we provided a clear, concise breakdown of the various components of your tax bill. And as you can see, we have the City of Brampton's net budget increase of 0.8%. That translates into 0.3% on the property tax bill, or $17 on the average home. We have the Region Appeals net budget increase of 2.9%. That translates into 1.1% on the property tax bill, or $53. We're not forecasting any change for the school boards, so there's no impact to the tax bill. So what that leaves us with is the overall property tax bill increase of 1.4%, or $70 on the average home. In addition, we've just prepared the following illustration to clearly indicate where you will see the new property tax amounts resulting from this budget. And again, the net budget, the overall property tax increase will be increasing 1.4%. Mayor Brown, members of council, and members of the public, thank you for listening to our budget presentation today. I think I can speak on behalf of leadership and the team behind all of us that we are very proud of what we have been able to accomplish with this year's budget proposal. This concludes our presentation, and we look forward to working with you through budget deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. We can get some. Do any members have questions or comments on the presentation? Councillor Fertini.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. So how do we figure out, when I look at an average single-family dwelling or detached or condominium at this price, which I can never find a house at this price, how we get our taxes, a condominium of 260,000, or an average home, 500 and something thousand. So how do we figure out that?
Through the chair. So what you have to keep in mind is these are assessment values provided to us from MPAC. They don't necessarily correspond with market values. So they typically trail. They will trail sometimes 20%, 25% from market values. But effectively, that's across the board on all types of properties. So, you know, there are properties that will be in the municipality that have this value.
Yeah.
But typically, their market values are much higher than this.
Okay, and slide number 23. We got the federal gas tax. What was the percent? Is that still 2 cents per liter? Is that what
Through
we
the
get?
chair, the federal gas tax is actually a more of a firm amount. It's just over $30.5 million per year.
So they don't go
So
by
the provincial gas tax is more based on the a number of cents per liter.
Okay, and that's why I don't see here the provincial.
Yeah, so the provincial gas tax is currently 2 cents per liter, but it's intended to increase to 4 cents per liter over the next several years. And that's in the operating budget.
I thought last year, I thought it was, a roll was already raised to 2.5 cents. Wasn't it? Or from 2 cents it went to 2.5?
Yeah, through the chair, so the province announced the previous government that the doubling of the provincial gas tax, and that comes into effect April 1st of this year. So what we've seen to date is a closure from the 2 cents per liter. It'll be now 2.5 cents as of April 1st, based on the government's announcement, previous announcement.
Okay, understood.
And then, sorry, then the following year will be another half cent, and the third year will be a full cent to get us to the doubling.
And slide 24, we're looking at water mains break and sinkholes. Doesn't that the region should be taking care of that? Why is it on our budget? Water mains, or anything to do with sinkholes? The
So-
water costs, it's their cost.
Through the chair, so the first two the first two pictures on the left-hand side are city assets, and then the two pictures on the right actually is, one is the Gardner Expressway and another is a water main leak on Gerard. But the intent of the intention of this was to show if we're not making the investments in our infrastructure at the appropriate time, that they will degrade, and then they could possibly result in disruption to service and more costly reactive measures to deal with the situations.
Okay, so it's not part of our budget then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bowman.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. This is a little different, I guess, than some of us are used to. There will be no presentations from individual departments. So we're here tonight to ask all our questions of the individual departments without them doing a formal presentation to us. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the presentation that we provided today is very similar to what we've been doing the last two budget sessions. Okay. So it was about 3 years ago where we used to do department by department presentations. They seem to stretch on for a long time. We would take several days to go through those and walk through the questions. But yes, we've narrowed it down to one presentation from the CAO and myself. And yes, you can ask any question on any department.
Okay. Now, just to confirm, Peter, will we be able to ask questions about individual departments anytime over the next 5 meetings as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's the intent, as long as Budget Committee's still sitting.
Good, okay. Thank you. Then let's start. Sorry, Councillor Balashi. Through you, Mr. Chair, 2019 base operating and growth highlights, Dave. Page 15, I think it was, on your presentation. We've got the $6.5 million reduction in base operating expenditures. Staff requests represent $4.2 million of that. And from what I've seen in our budget book, when you add up all the staff requests, we're requesting 181 new positions. So 181 new positions is covered by that 4.2 million? Or are we expecting, you know, people to retire and things like that?
Through the chair, so, you know, if people are retiring, obviously we'll do that assessment, whether we still require that position or whether we reallocate that to an area that is growing and requires that new service. Otherwise, we would then return that through the budget. What I would say is that this staff request number does not include the transit service increase position. So that you have this transit service increase line there, that includes the bus operators and other support staff for the transit service
And that was,
increases.
I think, what was it, 92 or something, Alex?
Yes,
92.
correct. So this other $4.2 million would cover the additional firefighters and other staff throughout the organization.
Okay. Thank you. Next question is, on the same page, we're predicting $1.3 million in rideshare revenues? Do we have that now?
Through the chair, based on the revenue we received in 2018 and mapping that out, that is correct.
Okay, and how does that compare to the revenue we get from taxi licenses?
Through the chair, it is significantly more because right now the money we receive on the licensing for taxis is essentially, it operates under a net zero or cost recovery basis. The ride-sharing revenue is set up on a model to be a fixed flat rate for the license and then a cost or an amount of 3 cents or so per ride on top of that. So that results in that revenue increase.
It's not bad, 1.3.
But if I can be clear, through you, Chair, the money collected for rideshare can only be used to support that line of business. It is not general revenue that can be used anywhere in the corporation.
Okay, fair enough. Page 23, 2019 capital budget by funding source. The federal and provincial grants, especially in the area of transit, we're looking at approximately $46 million. This may be a hypothetical question, through you, Mr. Chair, sorry. If that money does not come through grants, are we prepared as a council or as a city to fund that through reserves that we currently have?
Through the chair, so we would have to come back and reevaluate the situation at that time. If that was the case, I believe maybe Alex may want to speak to, you know, I know he can't necessarily give a guarantee, and I don't think anybody can at this point, but, you know, there are conversations that are going on, and he does feel very positive about it at this stage. But again, we would have to address that if that were to be the case.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, just what the treasurer just mentioned, I mean, clearly the public transit stream funding has been announced. The bilateral agreements between a federal and provincial government have been signed. It's now just a matter of when the province will release the application process to allow us to apply for that funding. If that funding model changed, then we'd have to come back collectively back to council for some decisions that would have to be made if that funding was ever pulled, but there's been no indication of that to date.
Okay, and we did have promised funding, I guess, 2 years ago for electronic buses and vehicles. Are we anticipating that to come back on stream in the next year or two?
So again, through the chair, the public the PTIF funding in phase one, we've implemented many projects, and one of them being the Airport Road Zoom order transit along Airport Road. The actual one that you're referring to, I believe, through the chair to Councillor Bowman, is the electric pilot project. That was funded by multiple levels of government through different funding mechanisms, one of them being part of the carbon tax, which when the new government came into effect, the province pulled. Therefore, the 8 million that the province had anticipated that funding that project has been withdrawn. We are still aggressively trying to find alternative funding, but we haven't been successful to date, but that's something we are continuing to pursue.
Okay, thank you. And I think I've still got one more question for you, Alex. And that's the highest value projects we've got from page 25. Fare collection equipment, am I right to assume that that's for transit, fare collection equipment?
Depending, through the chair, absolutely, that is for the transit.
Okay, and is that Presto, or is that?
That's the Presto equipment.
Okay.
So part of the contract that we came back to council with some time ago, that we engaged with Metrolinx on the whole Presto change, was part of a model, if you recall, where there's percentages that Presto would get as well as replacement of equipment. The equipment replacement was contingent on fundings from different levels of government, and this being one of them. So this is a portion from the city, the tax base, versus the funding that we would get through the public stream funding, and that's one process that we'll be going through with an application.
Okay, and the change to Presto is fantastic. I like that, but not too long ago, the City of Toronto had their numbers, and they recognized that there was tens of millions of dollars in fare discrepancies between the Presto card and what should have been paid. Are we recognizing any of that in our transit system and in our budget? Or do we collect those numbers, for example?
So through the chair, we definitely collect all the numbers. Our equipment's a little bit different than the Toronto Transit Commission. We are going through a replacement program, and that's part of the funding that's being requested by the different levels of government, which will have more enhanced features to Presto. But right now, we have over 85% users on Presto. It's been very successful in Brampton. We've had a few glitches that you would expect in any type of product like that, but clearly we reconcile right down to the dollars in terms of the usage of that. So
okay, do we know what our loss might be? Is it anywhere near? I don't think it'd be anywhere close to what Toronto's is, but I would anticipate if they've got the same issue, we would have the same issue here in Brampton. Do we know that number?
No, we would not have the same issue. And through the chair, our numbers, we do have reconciling where they're in the thousands of dollars in differences, but they're definitely reconciled through time. Definitely not what Toronto's seeing. Toronto's seeing a very different thing because they are on a different system, which Brampton is not experiencing. And I think there's an article that came out, I believe today or yesterday, talked about a glitch in the system that was experienced at the Toronto Transit subway system. This is not something that Brampton has. So our equipment has been around for, my gosh, the better part of 8 or 10 years, I believe now, and has been working successfully. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. And just to follow up on that, as Councillor Bowman was talking about the infrastructure deficit at one point and the federal and provincial contributions, I do know today that there's a doubling of the federal gas tax. I assume that's not reflected in the budget documents we have, and so it'd be good to get that information for later in the week. And I know we look at that infrastructure deficit, but I would note, when I look at that infrastructure deficit, I see a share of that should be the provincial contribution, a share that should be the federal contribution, and when those programs come out, that's when you want to be ready so that you can get you can leverage the other 2/3. And I think Brampton is certainly putting themselves in a position. The fact that we've got a 2% infrastructure levy and a 1% transit levy, are there many other cities that would have both levies like that in terms of Canada's big cities?
Through the chair, it would be for a combined levy, it would be probably very few that would have that. I believe Mississauga would have similar to that, but not necessarily a 1% for transit. They have 1% for fire services.
No, but it's great because it shows we're taking a leadership role in addressing the infrastructure deficit. So kudos to staff on that. We have Councillor Fortini for a second time.
Mr. Mayor. On the Belmore, 2019, on the Balmoral construction, I remember, and we have in the 2020, we have Howden Recreation. I remember there was a lot of rumors all those facilities were coming down. You know, me and Councilor Miles worked really hard on these two, but on Howden, I thought it was gonna be done in 2019 and Balmoral 2020, because that one's, Howden's already shut down. And why are we working on that one and keeping that one so closed? Shouldn't we reverse it and work on the one that's closed? I don't know, I guess I'll.
Through the chair. So Howden is partially closed. The pool is closed, but if you recall the presentation to council, spoke of a few domino impacts, but the one that was restricting our ability to act quickly on Howden was a potential land situation. We're in the process of negotiating some agreements, and so that's what's holding that up. And it was more prudent for us to sort of fast track some of the other ones that were ready to go, and this one is coming up in the coming years.
You're absolutely right, I forgot about that, but can we add Victoria Park Arena in this budget? Since the other one has to sort of look at,
Through the chair, I think that's on the agenda for tomorrow for our discussion.
good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you, Councillor Fortini. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a follow-up to the chair's question with regards to the infrastructure levy, which the residents of the city have been paying for the past couple of years, I didn't see it in your on-screen presentation, but there is a table here in our binder on page 20. Could we have that put up on the screen and discuss it for a moment? Is that possible? On page 20, Mr. Clerk. That's page 20 of the agenda, the appendices today. 4.1-21. It was in our agenda. Not in the presentation, but in the printed agenda.
4.1-21, right?
Correct. Mr. Clerk, this page here. Getting warm. Yeah, and you can just scroll down to the appendix 2B. Thank you. I think that this chart speaks volumes, and perhaps if we could have staff just explain the significance of these contributions and what they represent as a whole to closing the infrastructure gap that we are looking at over the next 10, 20 years or so.
Through the chair, so as I had included in the presentation, with the 2% infrastructure levy this year, that would bring the funding envelope that we would have available to, put towards infrastructure replacement to $63 million per year. Every year, we've put forward through our long-term financial master plan endorsed by previous council, and we're hoping that this council is committed to that as well, to continue on with the annual infrastructure levy increase. You'll see that year over year there's incremental amounts being put towards the infrastructure contributions. So what would be proposed in the 2020 budget would be roughly around $73 million, and then that increasing by another by adding another 2% infrastructurally, increasing to $83 million. So you see that over the next 10 years, if we continue with the 2% infrastructure levy increase, you will be growing from somewhere around $63 million to $170 million in 10 years as an annual contribution into infrastructure. as I presented in the, in my presentation, when you look at depreciation and when you look at the annual average need for our infrastructure, you know, it does end up surpassing the depreciation amount, but it still falls short of annual annual needs, which were somewhere around 213 million. As you know, we're still adding assets to our base as well, so that's not necessarily picked up in our forecast. This forecast has already been included within those numbers that you saw before you, from where we're going from 250 million to 750 million dollar infrastructure deficit. So, you know, even at those levels, that infrastructure gap continues to increase. However, again, I was mentioning, you start to see that curve bending towards the end of the 10-year term, so we're beginning to stabilize at that point in time.
Okay, because if I just do a quick sum of these amounts between 2019 and 2028, it's over $1 billion, and this is what it will take. And I believe that this council is very committed to ensuring that we're putting away the necessary funds needed to repair our infrastructure and to keep it in good order. And this is a significant investment on the part of residents, and I think that the fact that we're looking at the proposed increase that we have, and considering that we're still putting away this year $63 million on behalf of the residents of Brampton, I think is incredible. And I think that this chart is really important, and I wanted to give it a chance to be discussed today. Thank you.
If I could just maybe add one additional comment to that, and just just wanted to make clear that the money that we're allocating in this year's budget, we actually fully allocate out to the capital program. So it's not like we're saving this money and putting this in reserve. It's effectively going to a reserve, but we flow it right out to new capital projects right away. And I think it's, you know, this infrastructure was not originally funded from the property tax bill. I think that's an important message to the public. This was funded through the development charges originally for those assets that were put into place. And when it comes time to replace those assets or do major repairs to them, it then has to go onto the property tax bill. So I think that's an important message to get out to the community, that you know, it's something that was paid for from a different source before, and then when it comes time to replace it, the funding source has to be the property tax bill, unless you can find, as the mayor mentioned, alternative funding sources through other levels of government to help fund, you know, 2/3 of that cost.
Okay, great points, Councilor Vicente. I think that chart does speak to the rather significant contribution that Brampton residents are making towards the infrastructure deficit. Councilor Frattini.
Last time. Thank you, Ms. Can we go to page 29, the last one? Just wanted to see. Slide, yeah, please. Yeah. No. Thank you. So, every time we do these taxes, we're always like, the city always gets the blame. It's always about us. So when we look at our tax class assessment, it says a tax levy for the city, region, and school. Do we put a percentage on there, what each year, what they raised, or it's all a total on the levy of reassessment, what the value is on the property?
Sorry.
So it says under here, on the second line, it says RT, tax class assessment. Then it says rate levy, that's for the city, and the region rate with a percentage. Do we put the amount in there on the property tax, what each party or each division puts for the tax, or it would be the city, the region, or the education, the percentage?
Through the chair, so the tax bill would show up exactly like this. The tax bill is actually regulated. So yes, everybody's tax bill would include, to the left, they would include their current value assessment for the given year. And then for each of the city, region, and educational components, it would provide the tax rate for each of those, as well as the proportion of the tax bill. So if this tax bill is $5,000, it would show the proportion that is for the city, the proportion of that's for the region, the proportion of that for the education portion of the bill.
That's reassessment part. I'm saying the percentage. So if we are at 2%, the region's at 3%, does it show there, say 2%, region 3%, school 0%? To show who's raising it, because this was always a misunderstanding in the past.
Through the chair, it won't actually show on here because there's a number of other factors that go into changing the tax rate. Actually, if you look over a period of time, the tax rates are actually falling because assessment values are increasing. So what we do publish with the tax bill is a brochure that explains the property tax impact for the year. So the regulation doesn't allow us to include that type of information on the tax bill, but we do include a brochure that goes out with the tax bill that breaks down, the property tax bill by the city, the region, and the educational component explains the increases for each.
But if we go on slide 11, it shows the city at 0.3, and it shows the region 1.1, and the school 0. How come we don't put those numbers in there? So who raises what?
So through the chair, so the tax rate initially gets readjusted because of the new assessment that comes on. And then there's also reassessment shifts that happen between residential and non-residential properties as well. So immediately the tax rates get adjusted downwards to reflect the new assessment that's coming on. From there, then they increase depending on the additional tax dollars that are required by the city. So there's an initial phase where the tax rates are adjusted to reflect the new assessment income that the city is receiving. And then from there, the tax rates are adjusted to reflect any additional dollars required or any reductions in your budget.
I think we have to talk offline. I'm lost.
Yeah. So through the chair, as I mentioned, it's very complicated tax.
It should say the rate there. We're going to raise it 3.3, 0.3. It should show the city. This region is raising at 1.1. They already passed the budget. It should show 1.1. And the schools at 0 impact. It should show 0. So at least they could see who raised what. Because at the end, if we do a whole total, it's always, the city of Brampton raised at 3%.
Through the chair, again, the most I can do is include information that would supplement the tax bill. Again, the regulation requires all municipalities effectively to lay out the tax bill the same way. Even when we, and you'll see what's not on here is the removal of the hospital levy. We used to have a line on here regarding the hospital levy, but that's come off in this budget. Even that, what we're allowed to put on for that comment is regulated, and there's very limited amount of room that we can actually include on this tax bill.
Okay. Thank you.
So following up on Councillor Fertini's point, so I think he makes a good point. Our logo is on the tax bill. It's not the Region Appeal logo. It's not the Provincial Education Ministry logo. It's our logo. So does the provincial regulation state we can't put what the education increase is, what the region increase is, and what the city increase is?
I'd have to look at the exact details of what we could and couldn't do, but I would lean towards at this point that we wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Well, if you could look into that and get back to us on that, and then maybe also find out if we wanted to add an additional letter highlighting what the city of Brampton increases versus the other portions of the property tax. Just find out what we're allowed to do. If we're going to do one mailing, it would be good that the residents know who's increasing their bill.
So through the chair, so I do have to explain that when we show the property tax bill, it's the average tax bill. So everybody's property will change differently.
Yes.
So some people's assessments year to year go up higher, so they will go up higher than 1.4%. Some people will go lower than 1.4%. So again, that's the average tax bill, but not everybody's property is increasing at the same rate. So they all get a different proportion or share of the increase or decrease in the levy that you need to raise in your municipality.
But if I can add to that, through you, Chair, we can work with our communications team to identify opportunities and tools to ensure the message gets out that our proportion of the increase is, if this stands, 0.3%. The region is 1.1 on the average assessment. Taking similar type of information we have here, adding that in as a flyer, as well as providing that communication through various media outlets to ensure that we do what we can. if we can't adjust the tax bill because it is regulated, as our treasurer has stated, at least we'll try and come up with those solutions to add that out there.
Okay, I appreciate that, and maybe we could inform council of what communication tools we have and what we can include on the bill while we're doing the budget deliberations. If you could let us know during this week, that would be appreciated. Councilor Bertini, did you have anything else on that point? Sorry.
So in Toronto, you have curbside waste. Midas is off. So the house, you got the water bill, you got your property tax, curbside waste because you pay extra on the curb, and your parking. If you have a driveway, you have to pay that little logo. It's all on there, and it shows how it's balanced. Under reassessment, what the value is, has got nothing to do with your increase. If this is higher, your tax bill at the total, but your 1.1 or the 0, it has nothing to do with the reassessment.
Yeah.
So if this is worth $10, you're paying 0.3 on $10. So the total bill at the bottom is only what the value is, but the percentage for each levy, the education, the region and all, that's standard. All right? Or am I lost here? I don't know, my wife thinks here, I just look at the one in Toronto, I see curbside waste, water bill.
Yeah, I'm gonna use the famous words, it's complicated. You know, property taxes are very complicated, and, you know, we're trying to bring it down to the, you know, to the level that the public can understand. But it's very complicated processing behind the scenes.
I'm just answering your question that you're saying each house has a different value. That's the assessment. The total of the property tax, one's higher, one's lower. But the rate, if it's 0.1, it's across the board. If the city is at 0.3, it's across the board. It doesn't matter what your house is assessed and what's value. That's when it shows the amount of the taxes which is higher, as far as I know. Am I correct? Or no?
Through the chair, so, you know, if your property tax increases more than somebody else's, it will multiply by that tax rate, and therefore you'll have a bigger share of the pie, effectively. If your property taxes are decreasing or not going up as much as somebody else's, you'll have a smaller percentage of the pie that gets shared on your property tax increase.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Fertini. Councilor Singh.
Sure. Thank you, through your chair. So we were discussing about other levels of government. So we sent a letter out of projects for 2 months ago, I think, approximately. So I know we as councilors and the mayor has been out there, but has there been any traction on staff sense or any interest from different levels of government on any of those projects?
Through the chair, we had some constructive dialogue with our federal counterparts on a number of different opportunities. The key aspect to those funding requests lies on two key pieces. One is the window for those allocations for those buckets to be open to accept applications, and two, the bilaterals between the federal government and the province need to be signed off on. And right now that there's some challenges getting both parties to sign off on those. But once those windows are open, we are ready with our applications to put them in.
Yeah, I know that sounds promising. Is there any approximate timeline? I know it's hard, but like, are we looking at a year, a few months on this? Yeah.
Through the chair, a few months.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Appreciate the update.
Okay. Councilor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you guys had a chance to look at today's federal budget?
Through the chair, the short answer is no. It'll be part of our update tomorrow.
Okay, do we have any additional questions? See none. Do public? Okay. We have a motion to receive the presentation. Councilor Vicente, seconded by Councilor Willens. All those in favor? Motion carries.
So through you, Mr. Chair, tonight was a 2-hour window that was set aside to start budget deliberations, and the intent was to have the presentation and some general questions. You will notice on the order paper that was put on your desk, there are a number of pieces of correspondence, 1 through 5, that committee may wish to consider. We have given public notice in terms of public delegations to come tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. We will have a period at the end before committee recesses tonight of a 15-minute public question period. And we're at the will of committee if they wish to ask more questions specifically on the budget, particular program questions, or to consider the 5 pieces of correspondence and potentially receive those before committee goes into public question period and recesses for the evening, unless committee wishes to continue with the meeting. So staff are at the will of committee.
Councilor Vicente has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a point of discussion on correspondence item 9.5-1, letter from George Startup. Mr. Startup makes a couple of points that jumped off the page to me here. He says that I fully support user fees. And just a question to staff, what capacity does the municipality have to apply user fees to various aspects of the city? I know, for example, we charge fees for use of recreation centers. Are there more opportunities going forward that this council should be exploring?
Through the chair, I think, for the most part, we've probably addressed most of the ones that are probably easier to administer. I suppose there are some other avenues, some other additional user fees, and user fees would be inclusive of fines and so on. It wouldn't necessarily just be use of a service. It could be fines, surcharges of such. Whether that would amount to significant revenues, I wouldn't know necessarily, depending on what services we're looking at. But obviously you want to weigh those types of things against how costly it would be to administer that type of function.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Also, there is a suggestion here that on members of council expenses, the suggestion that gifts and money to charities need to be defined. Would staff be able to provide any suggestions on how members of council could have better control over how they use their expense accounts when giving to charities and local groups in the community?
Through the chair, we did do some benchmarking recently. We just, in the last term of council, we did just pass an update to the mayor and council expense policy, and we did do a number of benchmarking benchmarking efforts with our comparative municipalities, and the policy now is in line with many other municipalities. But if council wants to direct staff to go back and look at alternatives to those, to some of that work that we've done, we could do that. We'd prefer if we could have direction to do that. But again, as the expense policy as it is today, under this new council, has been done with significant benchmarking efforts.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No further questions.
Okay, Councilor Fortini?
Just a quick question. In the past, what's the rate? What is it, 4.6 million is 1%? Or is it 4.8 this year?
Yeah, through the chair, it's 4.8 million. It is 1% city net budget increase.
Right. Thank you.
Councilor Palashi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm still a little bit confused about the way we're running with this budget. I was expecting to see kind of a departmental overview and then align and set up my questions from there. I don't recall it being like this in 2017, because I think I was sick for the majority of that budget, unfortunately. So I guess I do have some questions that relate to information that I would need provided. I guess, Rick, you're in front of me, so let's start with you. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I guess I'm going back to question period. Rick, when we're discussing, is that okay, Peter? Okay. when we're discussing development charges and the funds that are coming in based on 2019, how do we figure out our estimate of those funds that are coming in? Do we take it over the last number of years or last year? How do we determine what our estimate is for DCs that are coming in? And Rick, I'm picking on, sorry, and you're acting in the role, and I apologize, maybe I should go to.
Through you, Chair. No, I don't mind at all. I do just want to say that that primarily is probably a role of finance, and we do, in the building division, have historically worked with Janet Lee to discuss what the upcoming year would entail in terms of development, and then from that we also work on projections that used to be done through growth management and planning. But I will turn it over to Dave to provide a more specific answer.
Through the chair, that's Rick's correct. So we do work with his department to determine, what type of activity we've seen, what type of activities sort of in the pipeline that we're predicting. We do look at past trends as well to determine where we may forecast those numbers to be. When we do look at the longer term projection, obviously, there could be ups and downs, so we're not so concerned about, sort of some leeway either way. We do kind of forecast some of that into the numbers. What we're more concerned about is when there's a big drop in activity that may stall significant amounts of revenues coming in, which would then affect the program that you would see in the capital.
Mm-hmm. So is it based on, try to rephrase the question. We're estimating a certain amount of development charges per, is it safe to say, building permit issued?
Through the chair, that's correct. We would take building permits issued, residential obviously being the large part of that, but there are some other building permits that are issued on the non-residential side as well. We would extrapolate things where we wouldn't think we would actually collect development charges. Say it's another level of government where we wouldn't expect those types of things to happen.
Yeah. And do we base that on the number of building permits that are issued in the previous year or the previous 2 or 5?
Through the chair, we look at some of the planning forecasts as well as looking at some of the past data as how many we've issued. So we're looking at averages that we've done sort of year over year, as well as working with some of the planning forecasts to determine what we might look like going forward.
Okay. And planning forecasts are very difficult. We understand and know which ones we know, but we don't know the ones we don't know. So that being said, Rick, can I get kind of a breakdown of building permits, and I asked this at a council meeting not too long ago, if I can get kind of a breakdown of building permits issued over the last, how many years do we look at?
Through the chair, we could go back as many as 10 years, 5 years, it depends on what, I guess what you're trying to get to with your question is, we can provide you 5 years worth of history if that's something you're looking for.
And is that something that you get from the building department to incorporate into our vision of the development charges coming about 5 years?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay.
Through the chair, if I can add to that, certainly if you want to give me the number of years, Councillor, that you'd like to go back, I can give you our 3-year projected revenues as well. Typically for the second and third year, we'll base it on an average of the previous 5 years. Mm-hmm. For the immediate year forward, 2019, we typically do canvass the builders to get an idea for how many they anticipate in terms of actually pulling permits for and delivering occupancy on. So for the immediate year following this, we do have a relatively accurate idea of development charges coming in from the residential side specifically. Mm-hmm. But for the rest, it is, as Dave has mentioned, based on planning growth projections and then averages of historical activity.
Okay, so can we do that in say 5 years?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great, thanks, Rick. Chief, where are we with the fire campus?
Through the chair, the fire campus now, we're getting close to awarding the construction manager. It just went, procurement is closed, and so now we're identifying who will be that individual responsible for the construction management. We basically have finished the design. Now it's time to build the facility. We expect groundbreaking to start probably in late summer of 2019 with anticipated opening of early 2022.
Late 19, opening of 2022, early 2022. Is there any additional funds that are captured in the next consecutive budgets that that are recorded in here?
Through the chair, for the campus specifically?
Yes.
No, there is not.
Okay, so that's all been previously budgeted and allocated?
Yes, through the chair, that's all been previously allocated in the $47 million that was approved last year.
Okay, and then the offset of the current headquarters and what we're kind of thinking around that is it will be coming in the future of 20, because we don't really need to do anything until the 2021 area, right?
Yeah, so through the chair, there is the request for the design funding for Station 201 for the rebuild for that this year with the construction for in 2020, and then that would probably take about a year and a half or two to build. I think the goal is to align that so you would open up the campus and Station 201 at the same time, so we could effectively move our administration group over to the new headquarters.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. Oh, I see I started something. Mr. Chair, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Councillor Paleshi. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the facade program still exist?
Through the chair, yes, it does. The facade and building improvement programs for the downtown area.
Yeah,
Yes,
was there any surplus, and what's the budget for this year?
I'd have to look at that to determine. I can't quite recall now if we're including amounts in this year's budget. Just check here. Typically, it's usually around $300,000 per year.
Through you, Chair, can I ask for clarification, Councillor Dillon? Are you asking if we spent all the money that was allocated in 2018?
So it's a two-part question. A couple of years ago, there was a surplus, about $300,000. And I'm just wondering if there's any new money allocated to the budget, specifically towards the facade program.
We have in 2019 proposed $300,000 in total, $150,000 for the building improvement program and $150,000 for the facade improvement program for the downtown core.
And from 2018, was there any leftover?
In 2018, I would have to go back and verify, but I do believe we allocated the majority of the funding for 2018, if not all of it. I can verify.
Fair enough, but so roughly $300,000 for 2019?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fortini.
Thank you. Just a quick question with Councillor Paleshi said on the development charges. When we bring that forward, can we look at the permits that was done in the last 5 years? What was done in maybe, Rick, the last 5 years, how we scaled, how many permits we get per year? From 2014, you want 5 years? No, the last 5 years, because the last couple of years, you see me, and I know our development charges are way, way low compared to 5 years.
Through you, Chair. That is correct, Councillor. We've seen a remarkable decrease in the volume of specifically low-rise permits that have been issued in the last 3 years. 2015 was a fairly good year. The numbers have been, for the last three, approximately half of what we had averaged prior to that.
So is that due to maybe we're short on planning department, or we need more staff? Or did you add into the budget to get more staff, if that's the case, to keep our development charges up?
Through you, Chair. I think the answer is a little bit more complicated, but I do believe we do have a lot of vacant, low-rise land available, serviced land available. My honest answer to that would be that the lending rules that were put in place about 3 years ago dramatically affected the affordability of that type of a product. So what is predominantly single detached dwellings that have been approved in prior years that were selling, you know, at $900,000, the affordability of that product has become a lot less available due to the lending rules, the stress test, recent increase in the lending rates. So I believe it's a combination of many things that have led to that.
You're saying the exact same thing I said 3 years ago, that's what's gonna happen. I expected that because of the lending rate and the market, we lost the boat. Okay, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fortini. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm not sure how the budget was presented in previous years, but certainly as a new councillor, when the draft budget was presented on February the 25th, right? February the 25th, immediately after that, the department staff gave an opportunity for all of us to go through briefings on the budget, department by department, and ask as many questions as we wanted during those meetings. And so it was incredibly helpful to have that opportunity to go through department by department, line item by line item, the details of this budget, and be presented with what we see today, which is why some of us, especially the new councillors, don't have as many questions to ask because many of them were addressed during those briefing meetings, and that was super helpful for a lot of us. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and thanks for that process.
And I would note, I appreciate that the staff also provided a briefing where I could ask any question as they were working on this. And I think we highlighted at the beginning that staff put a lot of effort into this budget, and I think that's why we're pretty close to where we want to be. And thank you for acknowledging staff's work, Councillor Santos. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair. Dave, I just got a quick question on the accounting rules. Why we're, for the Center of Innovation, why we're putting the $80,000 all in 2019 instead of spreading that out?
Through the chair, $80 million, I believe.
What did I say?
Yeah, 80,000.
80,000,
so $80 million. So
I wish it was 80,000.
Yeah, I would too. That'd be a good deal. Again, effectively because we're making a commitment to the project. So when we go out for the procurement of that work, we're signaling that we are putting that money aside for that project.
But we will not be accumulating and paying ourselves interest on a yearly basis until the money is actually put out.
Through the chair, so as we mentioned, this is for borrowing, so we will only inactivate that borrowing when the cash flow is actually starting to proceed.
Good, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Willens.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I guess this is a question for Al, perhaps, but I see that Kathy Duncan is here. With the new ruling that the OSPCA brought forward, does that affect us in animal services in any way? I know that a lot of it dealt with livestock, but does that affect us at all as far as staffing going forward?
Through the chair, that's undetermined at this time. I believe Kathy's been meeting with her peers and they're trying to get additional information from the province. And as soon as we get some clarity on the situation, we'll know. There is a risk that some of those responsibilities will be downloaded to the lower tier municipalities, and we'll see where that goes, but at this time it's uncertain.
Okay, because I think right now it's just speaking on livestock, is it not, Kathy? Is it? No, it's everything? Okay, so there could be a possibility for more staffing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Willens. Seeing no more questions, we do schedule time for public, 15 minutes of public deputations. Are there members of the public that would like to make a deputation? Please state your name. Question. Question about tonight's proceeding.
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I'm a resident of Ward 3. I've been going to a lot of the meetings. Earlier this year, Fortini and Paletti have both noted that the number of development applications seems to be going down, with meetings being canceled because of that. Going back, it's been on a downhill slope. The budget for next year projects a 90% increase, sorry, not 90%, an 85% increase in number of unit starts. What happens if it doesn't suddenly shoot up 85% after it's been going down for 3 consecutive years? What if it's only 50%, or what if it doesn't go up?
Okay, maybe I'll refer to that to the Planning Development Services.
Just through you, Chair, just for clarity, you're asking for the 2020 increase? That's
yes.
So those numbers are based on a rolling 5-year average. So we won't know until later this year how accurate that projection really is, to be honest with you.
Do we have any kind of contingencies, given that it's been going down, and so this 5-year period captures a peak within it?
Through you, Chair, I mean, we don't have control over the market activity, obviously, in that industry. You know, we do our best to facilitate the onboarding of any new subdivisions that come through, but the costs that are associated with the actual construction and sale of the homes, you know, the city doesn't have control over, and I think at this point that is primarily what's been affecting the market for that product.
Mm-hmm. For the gas tax, it was specifically warned about this may not happen and the budget is contingent on that. Does the city staff already have plans for what happens if that $3.3 million doesn't show up?
So maybe we can help here. So on the first question that you raised, development charges aren't a revenue source for the city. It's to pay for growth. And if subdivision doesn't happen, that's growth that frankly the services associated with that growth don't need to be provided. And growth doesn't even pay for itself. And so it's actually, when you have a high growth community, there's a cost to the city. So it's actually the opposite. It relieves a pressure. And so I wouldn't look at development charges as a revenue source for the city. In terms of the gas tax, the provincial portion, we hope that they keep their word. But I would note we have got some encouraging news from the federal government that the fact is that it's going to be doubled. And so already the city looks like it'll be in a better position when it comes to gas tax revenue, thanks to the federal government. We hope that the province will not renege on any of their contributions, but maybe to the treasurer. If I'm correct, the federal contribution's more than the provincial contribution. And so shouldn't that doubling offset any loss that might happen if the province decides not to continue the upward escalation that the previous government promised?
To the mayor, so the federal gas tax funding is not, we're not able to use that on operating, whereas the provincial gas tax funding, we are able to use that on funding. So even though the federal gas tax, and you're correct, the amount is more that we receive from federal gas tax, it's over $30 million, where we're somewhere in the range of $13 million today on the provincial gas tax, so it's significantly more, but we can use provincial gas tax in operating. We can't use that in capital, so we'd have to direct those new, assuming the program hasn't changed, we'd have to direct those new federal gas tax funds towards capital funding.
And so that 30 million would be doubled to 60 million.
If that was the case. I haven't seen what has been issued recently.
And the province, at 13 million, if it's to be increased, how much was it going to increase this year?
I'd have to look at the exact numbers for the incremental increase that we experienced with the fiscal year for the province, but I think what you're asking, Mayor, is when we have the doubling of the gas tax provincially, it'll be approximately 30 million as well. But that's total, where federally you're looking at 60 million with a doubling.
But that's over a longer period. What was the increase going to be this year?
This year alone, in terms of dollar value, I'd have to find that out for you, what the exact incremental cost, and if you give me 1 second, I could probably confirm that. 4.8 million. I thought it was around 5 million, but I didn't want to be misquoted, so 4.8 million.
Okay.
Sorry, through the chair, I just wanted to comment that of that 4.8, only $2.5 million is tied to the move of the the doubling. The other portion relates to the ridership share of the pooled funds.
So we're talking about a small amount.
Okay, it's just my concern is the cities are required to run on a break-even basis at least, and the federal money, as was mentioned, is capital money which can't be used in order to ensure a balanced budget, which the city is required to run. That was what my concern was about. And then is so on the major 15, the top 15 projects, there's the Williams Parkway thing. Is that the same one that's been on the city books for the last 15 years?
So who wants to?
Through the chair, Peter, can you pull up that 15 list? I just want to make sure I got the right project. Thanks. Through the chair, I think it was 2020 is the one you were referring to. Yep, just go back one more.
Yes, the Williams Parkway widening.
Yeah, that's the widening of Williams Parkway from McLaughlin to North Park, to 6 lanes. Through the chair, from McLaughlin to North Park Drive.
Is there going to be anything to deal with the speeding that happens when people come off the 410 to Williams because people are traveling at highway speeds, then rapidly hit 70, which rapidly drops to 40, and so you routinely see people ripping through at 70. And there's also a speed trap set up, basically,
So
12 hours a day.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that would be a budget question.
Okay.
It's more enforcement. I would note just that the final point is that in terms of the city having a balanced budget, of course, if you look at the past number of years, the city has consistently run a surplus, and so if the province, for some reason, reneged on their commitment to municipalities, that amount is much smaller than the surplus that we've consistently run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a case of over the past 2 years, 10 million of that has come from transit, and there just isn't enough physical capacity for growth in order to get anywhere near that kind of surplus from transit. So that is my concern, because this is coming out of the transit budget. And so previously we've been able to substantially exceed our ridership targets, and that has the cause of surplus, but we're running into issues of the buses are physically full to the point where the drivers will not let passengers on a regular basis, not based on a passenger perception of it being full. So without that to help keep up the numbers, that is my concern. For if the gas tax money that was promised by the provincial government under Kathleen Wynne, which Doug Ford has not gone on the record and said, I will actually deliver it. That's where my concern has been for the.
Just through the chair, if I can just maybe clarify my comment about Williams Parkway. Williams Parkway is actually from Kennedy to North Park. It's being done in 2 phases, and the second phase is following up in 2022.
Okay, thank you. Any other public questions? On that note, we're going to have a number of days of these budget deliberations. If I could ask the clerk just to let the public know of the days that we have reserved for budget deliberations if required.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So tomorrow, after tonight's recess, Budget Committee will reconvene at 3 o'clock until 5 o'clock. It will take a recess at 5, and then at 7 o'clock it will reconvene with scheduled public delegations. Anybody can come forward and speak on the budget. Budget Committee will continue till about 10 o'clock tomorrow night if necessary. And then following tomorrow night's session, if necessary, Budget Committee is scheduled to meet on Monday, March 25th from 9:30 in the morning till 12 o'clock. And if necessary, on Tuesday, March 26th from 9:30 in the morning till 5 o'clock, with the recommendations from this committee after it adjourns going to the special council meeting scheduled for 7 o'clock next Wednesday, March 27th.
Okay. Thank you. And We are recessed for budget deliberations till 3 o'clock tomorrow. Councilor Bertini.
Just a quick, I thought we were gonna have all the meetings at night. So for residents to come in.
I think the goal that the staff had was we're going to accommodate both evening and some meetings during the day, but the fact that we're having tonight's meeting at night was a reflection of that effort to accommodate residents that may want to watch this or attend. And I would note, we have been having some coffee chats around the city to engage residents, and we have 2 more planned this week in the wards of Councillor Fertini, Councillor Williams, Councillor Dillon, and Councillor Singh. We have a motion to adjourn? Okay, so we're recessed till 3 o'clock.